He who becomes a prince by the favor of the people must keep the people as his friend. But he who becomes a prince by the favor of the nobles must, above all, seek not to depend on them. The Prince, Chapter 9. The man who needs to be seen too soon never makes it to the top. You've felt this before, that tension in your body when someone less prepared gets the recognition, the urge to speak up, to prove it, to show that you know more. That's where the mistake begins. There's an invisible trap on the self-taught path, believing that depth automatically creates power. It doesn't. Power isn't truth, it's perception, and perception depends on position. Machiavelli didn't write for virtuous men, he wrote for men who wanted to rule. And he understood something brutal. If you reveal strength before you have structure, you become an isolated threat. The modern autodidact makes the same mistake, learns alone, fails alone, and then expects immediate recognition. But the world doesn't reward depth. It rewards controlled narrative. If you stay with me, you'll have to let go of the need to be understood too soon. That's going to hurt, because part of your identity depends on proving you're different. Now the first law begins. The man who learns in the dark builds depth, while everyone else builds a display window. There's a difference between exposure and evolution. Most people choose exposure. Quick courses, stacked certifications, strategic posts, performative networking, the appearance of movement. The real autodidact chooses evolution, repetition, mistakes, correction, doubt. Then repetition again. Invisible incubation is the phase where you build competence without building public expectation. That's strategic armor. When no one expects anything from you, you can experiment without social punishment. You can fail without damaging your reputation. You can walk away from a path without having to explain yourself. Public mistakes create labels. Invisible mistakes create skill. Modern society conditions you to announce every step, show progress, declare goals, ask for validation. But every early declaration activates the social courtroom. When you talk too much about something that's still fragile, you hand your vision over to external judgment. And external judgment creates emotional interference. Interference breaks focus. Machiavelli understood that building power requires time outside the public eye. He didn't call it incubation. He called it preparation before taking position. The autodidact who exposes himself too soon becomes a target of expectations. An expectation creates pressure, and premature pressure creates strategic mistakes. The law of invisible incubation requires 3 clear sacrifices. Let go of immediate applause. Let go of constant public comparison. Let go of the need to explain your plan. The third one is the hardest, because explaining eases anxiety. Talking about the plan feels like progress. Getting approval gives you dopamine. But dopamine isn't power. Power is consolidated structure before exposure. Here's the first technique, the strategic vault technique. Choose one core project that actually matters. Set a minimum period of 90 days. During that time, don't announce progress. Don't ask for opinions. Don't post intermediate steps. Don't discuss details. If someone asks, answer neutrally. I'm exploring a few possibilities. And stop there. Silence is contained energy. Contained energy becomes accumulated strength. The autodidact who learns to tolerate silence develops something rare. Internal stability that doesn't depend on applause. But there's a danger. Incubation can turn into avoidance. Many people say they're preparing, but they're really avoiding exposure out of fear of judgment. That's not strategy. That's immature self-protection. The difference is simple. In strategic incubation, you work every day. In avoidance, you consume content and call it preparation. If you want to apply this law correctly, you need a concrete metric. Every month, your core skill must be objectively better. If it isn't, you're not incubating, you're hiding. Write in the comments, incubation isn't avoidance, it's calculated preparation. Write it as an internal commitment, because the silent elite isn't born from early talent. It's born from years of building depth while the world stares at empty showcases. And remember this, incubation isn't your final destination. It's just the period where you build something no one can tear down once you decide to step into the light. Every rise requires a symbolic break. There's a quiet moment in the self-taught path when you realize something uncomfortable. The people around you don't actually want you to win. They want you to stay predictable. Predictability keeps the hierarchy stable. When you start evolving beyond the group reacts. Not with a direct attack, but with micro-pressures, discouraging questions, overly cautious advice, jokes that shrink your ambition, suggestions to be more realistic. It's not conscious malice. It's collective self-preservation. Machiavelli understood that every shift in position creates structural resistance. When someone rises, the balance changes, and the system tries to pull them back. Most people give in, because the need to belong is biological, but the man who enters the elite in silence learns to tolerate the discomfort of separation. Strategic disconnection doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It means recalibrating emotional access. You stay present, but you don't expose strategic vulnerabilities. You don't share early-stage plans. You don't seek validation for irreversible decisions. You reduce external influence over your direction. This is where many autodidacts fail. They grow technically, but remain emotionally dependent on approval from their old circle. That creates invisible self-sabotage. You start shrinking your own goals so you don't intimidate anyone. You soften your language to avoid envy. You delay moves to preserve harmony. Excessive harmony is a sign of stagnation. The elite isn't formed in environments of collective comfort. It's born in controlled psychological isolation. Here comes the second technique, the influence diet technique. For 60 days, do this. Cut by 50% the time you spend listening to opinions from people who aren't where you want to be. Stop discussing your ambitions with people who've never executed anything similar. Replace social validation with objective progress metrics. Less talk, more measurable execution. You'll feel something strange. Loneliness. And with it, doubt. That doubt is the test, because without constant validation, you're face to face with your own conviction. If your conviction depends on applause, it dies. If it survives external silence, it becomes internal identity. Machiavelli argued that a prince should not depend on the love of the people to rule. Love is volatile. Interest is stable. Apply that to your path. Don't depend on emotional approval. Depend on accumulated results. There's also a subtle behavioral shift here. Talk less about ambition. Talk more about execution. Over-declared ambition creates social expectation. Silent execution creates strategic surprise, and surprise is advantage. Another hard truth: some relationships will naturally weaken. You don't need confrontation. You don't need to announce a break. Just stop feeding connections that drain your energy and add nothing to your direction. Silence again. Silence as a filter. If someone constantly demands explanations for your choices, they're trying to keep you inside a map that's no longer yours. Strategic disconnection is the moment you accept that part of your old identity has to die. The friend who's always available, the son who has to justify every decision, the co-worker who over-explains just to be understood. That identity has to disappear. In its place, something colder is born. A man who chooses based on trajectory, not approval. Write in the comments. My direction doesn't need an audience. Write it as a symbolic cut. Because as long as you seek emotional comfort from your old group, you'll never have the courage to enter new territory. The law of strategic disconnection isn't about becoming antisocial. It's about becoming selective. And selectiveness is a prerequisite for the elite. Skill doesn't create power. Perception does. This is where a lot of self-taught people get frustrated, because they believe competence should speak for itself. It doesn't. The social world isn't a technical lab. It's a stage built on hierarchy. You can be the most prepared person in the room and still lose ground to someone who controls narrative, timing, and framing. Machiavelli was clear. It's not enough to possess virtù. You have to appear to possess it at the right moment, in the right way, in front of the right people. Appearing isn't pretending. It's choosing when to reveal. The autodidact who spent years in invisible incubation built something rare, real depth. But if he walks into the arena and dumps everything at once, he creates two problems. He intimidates without political structure. He reveals too much about himself. Both create resistance. Perception control starts with one brutal question. Who already recognizes your authority? If the answer is no one, then full exposure is strategic suicide. You need to build recognition progressively. It's not about talking more. It's about speaking with surgical precision. Here comes the third technique, the calculated strike technique. In competitive environments, never unload your entire arsenal. Identify the critical point in the discussion. Wait. Let others expose themselves. Let them make small mistakes. Step in only when you can solve something no one else has structured clearly. Short, direct. No excess emotion, then silence. That silence after you speak is just as important as what you said. It keeps you from diluting your impact by over-explaining or trying to extend your presence. Impact comes from the contrast between noise and precision. Another essential principle, perception control requires word economy. Insecure men over-explain. Strategic men state their point and stop. The more you talk, the more material you give people to analyze, criticize, and twist. Partial unreadability is protection. The silent elite understands this instinctively. They rarely reveal their full position. They keep a margin of ambiguity. They never show all their cards. That's not cheap manipulation. It's hierarchical self-preservation. There's also a common mistake among technically skilled autodidacts. They dismiss politics. They think politics is dirty, that pure meritocracy should exist. That naivete keeps them out of the elite. Machiavelli didn't judge politics. He studied it as power engineering. If you want to enter the elite, you need to understand 3 layers: real competence, strategic network, public perception. Ignore any of the 3 and you create imbalance. You've already built competence. Now you need to learn how to dose visibility. Timing is everything. Reveal too early and you trigger envy. Reveal too late and you become permanently invisible. The ideal point is when your competence is solid enough to sustain exposure, but still unexpected. Surprise forces a status recalibration, and status recalibration opens doors to higher circles. But here's the warning. If you use perception control just to impress, you become dependent on validation all over again. The goal isn't applause, it's positioning. Positioning means that when your name is mentioned, a specific image forms in people's minds. Specialist, problem solver, calm under pressure, discreet, you choose which image you want to build. And every interaction becomes strategic. Write in the comments, perception is territory. Write it as a reminder, because from this point on, you stop acting like someone waiting for spontaneous recognition. You start engineering recognition, and that changes the entire game. If you're aligned, now we enter the final law, the most dangerous one, the one that separates the competent from the sovereign. When he steps into the elite, he doesn't ask for acceptance. There's one final mistake that destroys a lot of self-taught men right when they start getting recognized. They want to belong. After years in silence, when they finally receive an invitation, attention, or respect, they feel the urge to please, to show they're approachable, to prove they deserve to be there. That's the last test. Machiavelli understood that a ruler who depends on constant approval becomes a hostage. The one who needs to be loved above all loses freedom of action. The man who enters the elite in silence has to keep one thing intact, his psychological independence. Cold sovereignty is the ability to stay centered even when the environment shifts in your favor. You don't speed up your speech. You don't become overly expansive. You don't reveal insecurities just to gain sympathy. You stay economical. The elite watches reactions. When someone rises, everyone tests him. They test your stability. They test your limits. They test whether you'll get dazzled. If you react with exaggerated excitement, you signal neediness. If you react with a need for acceptance, you signal dependence. Dependence reduces power. Cold sovereignty is controlled unreadability. You don't become inaccessible, but you don't become overly transparent either. You respond with what's necessary. You decide based on strategic interest. You keep a margin of mystery. Mystery creates quiet respect. Another essential point, don't confuse coldness with hostility. Hostility is reactive. Strategic coldness is stability. When they provoke you, you don't hit back impulsively. When they praise you, you don't overexpand. When they criticize you, you evaluate usefulness before reacting. This creates something rare, emotional predictability. And emotional predictability in power environments create structural trust. Dangerous men aren't the loudest ones, they're the most controlled. Here's the final technique, the internal anchor technique. Define 3 non-negotiable principles that guide your decisions. Don't share them widely. Use them as a silent internal filter. Before accepting a proposal, partnership, or greater exposure, ask, does this strengthen my position? Does this increase my emotional dependence on someone? Does this compromise my future autonomy? If any answer weakens your sovereignty, decline. No drama, no excessive explanation. Silence again. Silent refusals build a reputation for boundaries, and boundaries signal value. Many autodidacts reach the technical top and collapse politically because they try to please every side. Cold sovereignty requires accepting that not everyone will understand you, and that doesn't matter. You didn't build all this to be understood. You built it to be positioned. When you master incubation, disconnection, and perception, sovereignty becomes natural. You don't force respect. You don't ask for space. You take it. And once you take it, you don't move out of anxiety. You move out of calculation. Write in the comments, sovereignty over approval. Write it as a final seal, because the silent elite isn't made up of the loudest people. It's made up of the most controlled. The identity that dies here isn't weak, it's naive. It's the man who believed merit would be enough, who thought working hard would naturally put him at the top, who confused competence with authority, who talked to relieve tension, who explained himself to be accepted, who shared his plans just to feel validated. He wasn't incompetent, he was too transparent. And premature transparency in the social game is vulnerability. That version of you needed to be seen, needed to be recognized, needed someone to say you're different. He lived in reaction. Reaction to disrespect, reaction to invisibility, reaction to comparison. He confused movement with progress. That identity dies when you understand something few can handle. The world isn't unfair, it's structural. And structures don't change because you're good. They change when you learn how to operate them. The identity that's born now is less emotional, more strategic. It doesn't feel the urge to prove. It doesn't feel desperate to belong. It doesn't get intoxicated by praise. It doesn't collapse under criticism. It understands timing. It understands silence. It understands that power isn't noise. It's position. This new man doesn't walk into rooms to be admired. He walks in to observe. He doesn't speak to impress. He speaks to shift things. He doesn't move out of need. He moves out of calculation. He learned that incubation isn't delay, that disconnection isn't loneliness, that perception is architecture, and that sovereignty is absolute emotional independence. He becomes unreadable enough not to be manipulated, cold enough not to be pulled around, controlled enough not to betray himself. And here's the final point. The elite isn't a place. It's a psychological state. It's the moment you no longer need the world to confirm who you are. You confirm it internally and act accordingly. No announcement, no spectacle, no need for applause. The self-taught man who enters the elite in silence isn't the most visible. He's the most prepared. And when he's finally noticed, it's already too late. Because he's not trying to climb anymore. He's already above. Keep this as an internal rule. The one who controls his own frame doesn't beg for space. He takes it. In silence. There's something interesting about men who choose silence. They almost never know if they're on the right path. Years ago, I met a man who worked quietly on a team, where the loudest people always took the credit. He showed up early, left late, never argued in public, never tried to look indispensable. For a long time, no one mentioned him, until the day something went wrong. A complex problem, high pressure, tense meeting, raised voices, people trying to protect their own names. He didn't say much. He asked 3 questions, pointed out a structural flaw no one had seen. Silence in the room. There was no applause. But the way people looked at him changed. Months later, when a new strategic position opened up, no one debated the name. It was obvious. He never asked for recognition. He became inevitable. If you made it this far, you're probably that kind of man, the one who works when no one's watching, the one who learns when no one's asking, the one who builds while others perform. And that deserves something simple: respect, not emotional applause, structural respect. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for choosing depth over display. Thank you for enduring incubation when it would have been easier to put yourself out there. Thank you for accepting disconnection when it would have been more comfortable to please everyone. Thank you for studying perception when it would have been easier to complain about the system. Thank you for choosing sovereignty over approval. This channel isn't for everyone. It's for those who understand that real transformation isn't motivation. It's rupture. If this spoke to you, not with excitement, but with quiet recognition, leave a simple comment. One word: sovereignty. Not to boost the algorithm, but to mark your presence among men who understand the game. And if you stay here, stay the right way. Learning, calculating, moving with precision. No rush, no announcement. Because the world may ignore the loud man, but it never ignores the man who becomes inevitable. See you at the top, in silence.